For those unfamiliar with my work, every year I search through the contents of every issue of essentially every English-language nutrition journal in the world, so you don't have to. Of course, there's lots of important nutrition articles published in other journals, cardiology, oncology, pediatrics, so I also search through a number of medical subject headings every day as well. I'm privileged to live biking distance from the National Library of Medicine here next to the nation's capital. Now, anyone can do this. Let's say you like tangerines, and you want to see what's new with your favorite fruit. Well, you go to pubmed.gov, type in tangerine, press enter, and then click on Save Search. You can have them email you every time a new article gets published anywhere in the world on the subject of tangerines, free of charge. And while you're waiting for your first tangerine email, you can always catch up on all the tangerine papers previously published in the medical literature, all 7,468 of them. Using my search criteria, over the last year, 12,000 articles landed in my inbox. You can usually just tell by looking at the title and abstract if they're interesting, groundbreaking, practical, the criteria I use in picking which studies I'm going to cover each year. This last year, I ended up downloading, categorizing, reading, analyzing about 3,000 studies, which I turned into 365 videos so I could post one a day, year-round, to nutritionfacts.org, thanks to the generous support of the Jesse and Julie Rash Foundation. Now, 365 videos is like 12 hours of content, so I have to split it up across multiple discs. Volumes 5 through 9 covered the first 8 hours. This DVD you're watching now covers the next 2 hours, and I expect to release one final DVD in 2012, and then by 2013 I'll have another 12,000 articles in my inbox, and we'll do it all again next year. Even though you have the DVD, I do encourage everyone to check out nutritionfacts.org. It has all the videos from all the old DVDs posted online, completely free. It's the first and only kind of non-commercial, science-based website to provide free daily video updates on the latest discoveries in nutrition. It has hundreds of videos on more than 1,000 topics, and a new video is uploaded every day. You can rate videos, share videos, search videos, discuss videos. I have links to all the sources, so you can read the original scientific papers yourself, make up your own mind. You can ask me questions. You can read my blog. You can follow the site on Twitter, follow the site on Facebook, so you can share this potentially life-changing, life-saving information with those you care about the most. A strange letter was recently published in the Journal of Neuropsychiatric and Clinical Neuroscience, suggesting fruit as a treatment for depression. Starts out talking about how bad the disease is, how abnormally low levels of neurotransmitters like serotonin in the brain may be responsible, how we now have several classes of drugs, such as SSRIs like Prozac, that may work by boosting serotonin levels, but then of course notes how these medications bring with them some serious problems, side effects, etc., and so a new therapeutic approach is needed. How about using high-content sources of serotonin to provide our body with these substances, like plantains, pineapples, bananas, kiwis, plums, and tomatoes? What? Since when do plants have human neurotransmitters? Since forever, I was surprised to learn. Animal neurotransmitter substances in plants. They've got all the stuff we do. There's adrenaline in plants, there's dopamine, serotonin, melatonin. In fact, there was a recent study trying to figure out which varieties of tomatoes and strawberries had the most. And there's actually enough in a serving to enhance levels in our bloodstream. Humans use serotonin as a neurotransmitter. Plants use serotonin in a protective role. Adaptation, flowering, establishing its shape. In fact, the same drugs that we use to affect our psychology can affect a plant's biology. This is your plant, St. John's wort. This is your plant on Prozac, Ritalin, amphetamines. OK, so fine, bioactive human neurotransmitters in plants, but what's in it for us? Can fruit really be used to treat depression? Recent studies like this suggest that dietary patterns characterized by high intakes of vegetables, fruit, mushrooms, and soy products are associated with fewer depressive symptoms. The year before, it was this study of the association between dietary patterns and mental health in early adolescence, showing improved behavioral scores significantly associated with higher intakes of leafy green vegetables and fresh fruit. Could any of this be because of the psychoactive substances found in plant foods? The neurotransmitter serotonin, often referred to as the happiness hormone, is found in plant foods. But serotonin doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier, so it shouldn't affect our mood no matter how much we eat. The precursor to serotonin, however, what your body makes serotonin out of, is an amino acid called tryptophan. And there's a transport protein in the brain that plucks tryptophan out of the bloodstream, and so what you eat can end up affecting our mood. Back in the 1970s, they did tryptophan depletion experiments, where you give people specially concocted tryptophan-deficient diets, and indeed, their mood suffers. They get irritable, annoyed, angry, depressed, right? Their body just can't make enough serotonin. Likewise, you can give people tryptophan pills to improve their mood, and indeed, it became a popular dietary supplement until people started dying from something called eosinophilia myalgia syndrome, an incurable, debilitating, and sometimes fatal flu-like neurological condition caused by the ingestion of tryptophan supplements. May have been due to some unknown impurity, but better safe than sorry. Instead of supplements, there are dietary strategies one can use to improve mood. When people think tryptophan, they think Thanksgiving turkey and warm milk. But researchers at MIT dispelled those myths about a decade ago. Tryptophan is one amino acid among many found in proteins, and they all compete with one another for transport across the blood-brain barrier into the brain. And since tryptophan is present in most animal proteins in relatively small quantities, it gets muscled out of the way. If you eat plant foods, though, the carbohydrates cause a release of insulin, which causes your muscles to take up the non-tryptophan amino acids as fuel, and so your tryptophan can be first in line for brain access. Animal foods can even make things worse. When tryptophan is ingested as part of a protein meal, serum tryptophan levels rise, but brain tryptophan levels decline, due to the mechanism of transport used by tryptophan to cross the blood-brain barrier. The tryptophan levels in those given a high-protein turkey, egg, cheese breakfast dropped, whereas in the waffle OJ group, their tryptophan levels went up. This may actually explain the carbohydrate cravings one sees in PMS. Your brain may be trying to get you to boost tryptophan levels to feel better. Consumption of a carbohydrate-rich, protein-poor evening meal during the premenstrual period improved depression, tension, anger, confusion, sadness, fatigue, alertness, and calmness scores significantly among patients with premenstrual syndrome. Because synthesis of brain serotonin, which is known to be involved in mood and appetite, increases after carbohydrate intake, premenstrual syndrome subjects may overconsume carbohydrates in an attempt to improve their dysphoric mood state. We can choose carbohydrate-rich plant foods over animal foods to boost tryptophan levels, but ideally it would be more than just carbs. Since the main determinant of brain serotonin concentrations appears to be the ratio of tryptophan with others that compete with it for uptake into the brain, to maximize the mood-elevating effects of diet, one would ideally choose a snack with a high tryptophan to total protein ratio, which would mean primarily seeds, such as sesame, sunflower, pumpkin. Protein-source tryptophan as an efficacious treatment for social anxiety disorder, a pilot study. So what protein source did they use? Butternut squash seeds, because of their high tryptophan to protein ratio, as part of a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled crossover study of people suffering from social phobia, also known as social anxiety disorder. And they found significant improvement in multiple objective measures of anxiety in those eating these squash seed bars. Before studies like this one, a change in the composition of intact dietary protein was not seen as a possible option for the treatment of common psychological disorders associated with low serotonin levels. But that's because they were using animal proteins, which can make things worse, not plants. If this is true, then those eating vegetarian should be golden, and indeed, this was the reasoning used to explain why global mood was significantly better in the vegetarian than in the mixed diet group. It's all about carbohydrates and a huge tryptophan to protein ratio. The vegetarian group was instructed to avoid meat, fish, and poultry, and to restrict intake of milk, milk products, and eggs to a minimum. And within 3 weeks, the vegetarian diet group had a significantly improved global mood. When you look at a bottle of oil in the grocery store, there's a best before date, advising consumers how long they have to consume it before it starts going rancid and builds up oxidation products that can be particularly harmful to human health. Here are the best before dates for 8 culinary oils: almond oil, avocado oil, hazelnut, macadamia, grapeseed, rice bran, toasted sesame, and walnut oil. These are the best before dates in numbers of months, counting from the day the oil is made. So if you made a batch of walnut oil on January 1st, 2012, the best before date printed on the bottle from that batch would be 12 months later, January 1st, 2013. Now, this is making some pretty strict assumptions. This is assuming you're keeping the oil in the refrigerator in an airtight, dark container, so it's not exposed to air, room temperature, or light, particularly after it's opened. Now, these scientists were skeptical that the companies were printing accurate dates, and so they put all the oils to the test to find out what the true expiration dates were. Would it match what the companies say? Would the companies put a longer duration, trying to make the oil appear more stable than it really is? Or would they put a shorter duration, right, trying to encourage people to buy their product more frequently? For rice bran oil, the company said 7 months, and actual estimated shelf life found in the tests, 6.5 months. Oh, not bad, pretty close. In some cases, though, the truth was stretched one way, in others it was stretched the other way. Look at almond oil. They said it would last for over a year, and it really only stayed good for 3 months. And remember, that's 3 months in the fridge in the dark, and after production, not after when you buy it. Macadamia and walnut oil were the real outliers, though mac oil lasted the longest, over a year. The company totally undersold its stability. But for walnut oil, they said a year, and it only lasted about 2.5 weeks, according to rancidity testing with the Ransomat. The best way to keep and consume walnut oil is within the walnut itself. But which is better for cardiovascular disease protection, black walnuts or English, also known as common walnuts? Regular English walnuts have been shown to decrease cardiovascular disease risk. However, black walnuts do not appear to have been studied for their cardioprotective benefits until now. Maybe black are even better. Who do you think won the contest? 3 choices: black best, English best, or the same. I would have guessed black, just based on their rich color and flavor, but I would have been wrong. English best, and I'll show you why. They both tended to lower cholesterol, but when participants were given a meal containing a sandwich with salami and cheese on white bread smeared with 2 spoonfuls of butter, along with yogurt, and then a big handful of black or English walnuts, something very different happened. When we whack our arteries with that kind of load of saturated animal fat, our blood vessels immediately, within hours, become inflamed and stiff. You eat English walnuts with the salami sandwich, though, and they're so packed with anti-inflammatory goodness that you significantly lessen the impact. Black walnuts, however, did not improve endothelial function, the cells of the arterial lining, which can be explained by the nutritional differences between the nuts. English walnuts, for example, have nearly 10 times as much antioxidant capacity as black. To combat dyslipidemia, which includes high cholesterol, patients have several treatment options that include drugs, diet, and/or lifestyle changes. Drugs are effective, produce adverse side effects in a significant proportion of patients. Statins, such as Lipitor, are the most widely prescribed, but they produce adverse effects in up to a third of patients. Adverse effects are also associated with the other drugs in common usage. Adverse effects may include liver, muscle, and kidney dysfunction, skin disorders, abdominal pain, nausea, constipation, dizziness, flushing, neurological disorders, and cognitive impairment. On the other hand, therapies based on dietary and lifestyle changes produce little or no adverse events, in fact tend to have positive side effects, and are the cornerstone of recommendations by the official U.S. body, the American Heart Association, as well as the international guidelines. Recommendations include reduced intake of saturated fat and cholesterol, while increasing physical activity and increase an intake of dietary fiber. So we need to eat fewer animal foods, the only source of cholesterol, and more plants, the only source of fiber. A pooled analysis was recently published of 25 interventional trials investigating nut consumption and the levels of fatty substances like cholesterol in the blood. Here are the results of 4 of the best studies of nut consumption and risk of death from heart disease. Compared to eating no nuts at all, this is the associated drop in risk of death eating nuts once or twice a month, about once a week, a couple times a week, and then almost every day. We're talking about cutting the risk of our #1 killer in half with one simple, delicious dietary change, adding nuts to our daily diet. Part of this is from nuts' uncanny ability to lower bad cholesterol, and the worse off you are, the better it works. It's not like nuts just cuts your cholesterol a set percentage from wherever you start from. If your LDL starts out under 130, and we'd really like to see it about half that, then eating nuts lowers LDL about 3%, but start out in the mid-100s, and nuts work twice as hard. And if you're off the charts, ready to keel over any moment, nuts drop your bad cholesterol on average of like 10%. You'll note, though, many of these 25 studies were funded by industry groups, such as the ITNC-NREF, the International Tree Nut Council Nutrition Research and Education Foundation, or the International Nut and Dried Fruit Foundation, presumably throwing in the dried fruit part so they wouldn't have to be known as the International Nut Foundation. Either way, such trade groups have not shown themselves to be above conniving studies designed to exaggerate benefit. Case in point, from the Almond Board of California, showing almond consumption reduces DNA damage compared to the control group, who were instead made to eat pork. This is a classic drug company trick, right? Comparing your product to something you just know is gonna bomb. And lo and behold, in summary, consuming a diet containing 84 grams a day of almonds for 4 weeks decreased oxidative stress in young male smokers. Yeah, compared to pork. We've covered a bunch of ways nuts may cut heart disease risk. Boosting nitric oxide production in our arteries because of the arginine content in nuts, cutting down our risk of sudden cardiac death because of the magnesium content, and lowering the risk of our bad cholesterol because of why exactly? How do nuts lower our cholesterol? What are the potential mechanisms? This is where it gets a little complicated. These may be the various nutrients responsible for bad cholesterol reduction. Let me just touch on 2. First, fiber, then phytosterols. What's flowing through our intestines right now is going to end up as waste. That's the default unless any bits can be absorbed. We can imagine our enterocytes, the cells lining our intestinal wall, as a vast array of trash pickers, resource recovery workers. They're sifting through the river of potential garbage flowing past and picking up anything of use, a vitamin here, a mineral there, such that by the end, there really isn't much left that's desirable and truly gets dumped. So our gut also acts as our body's disposal system. Anything it wants to get rid of, it throws down the trash chute like excess cholesterol. Cholesterol plays a vital role in the body, and that's why our liver makes as much as we need. But if our liver feels there's too much cholesterol circulating around, it dumps the excess into the gut to get rid of it, knowing full well there'll be an ever-flowing torrent to flush it out to sea. We did, after all, evolve for millions of years on a plant-based diet like our great ape ancestors, and so we weren't designed for burgers and milkshakes. We were designed for fiber, and lots of it, 100 grams a day or more, a massive, quick-flowing stream. And so when our body throws some cholesterol down the trash chute, it knows it's going to zip right out. But what if our river dries up? Just a slow trickle of sludge because we're not eating enough whole plant foods. We still have the same number of trash pickers, but the volume and speed of the flow is way down on a fiber-deficient diet. So they're finding all sorts of stuff that otherwise would have been lost. So they're picking back up estrogen that our body dumps, cholesterol, and putting it back into our system. It's like you litter, and someone comes by and picks it up and says, excuse me, did you drop that? Fiber bulks up the flow, speeds it up, and dilutes everything, so lots of stuff may never even make it to the banks of the intestinal river to be picked up and inappropriately saved. The ability of phytosterols in plant foods to reduce cholesterol levels was first reported more than 80 years ago. The same trash picker analogy used to explain the effects of fiber on cholesterol can help us understand how phytosterols and phytostanols work. Just like phytoestrogens in plants have an anti-estrogenic effect by fooling your body into using them instead of our own estrogen, which is 1,000 times stronger, phytosterols are plant-based cholesterol lookalikes found predominantly in nuts and seeds. Here's what cholesterol looks like. Here's what a phytosterol looks like. Can you see the difference? When we eat nuts and seeds, and phytosterols find their way into our ever-flowing waste stream, our trash picker enterocytes in our gut lining throw them in their bins along with the actual cholesterol. Their bins can only hold so much, though, before they have to go empty them into our body before coming back to the banks of our fecal flow. And so if there's cholesterol in the waste stream, that's what loads up the bin. But if there's phytosterols too, half the bin may be filled up with cholesterol and half with phytosterols, leaving the other half's worth of cholesterol to flush out to sea. Meanwhile, our body gets those phytosterols absorbed and says, what am I supposed to do with these plant molecules, and chucks them back down the trash chute, where trash pickers further down the line may accidentally pick them back up again and repeat the process. So in the end, or out the end, because we swallowed all these phytosterols into our gut, less excess cholesterol gets reabsorbed, and it ends up getting dumped. This shows the increased fecal excretion of both dietary and endogenous cholesterol when one eats a phytosterol-rich diet. If our enterocyte trash recovery bins are half filled with phytosterols, might vitamins get crowded out too? We didn't know until last year, but the answer is no, even with a whopping 9-gram dose. Vitamin absorption was unaffected. Plant stanols dose-dependently decrease bad cholesterol concentrations, but not antioxidant concentrations in our blood. Now, 9 grams is like 10 times what we would expect from even a healthy diet. There's a plateau effect. At that 9 grams a day, you're way out here at the end, but as you can see, the cholesterol-lowering curve starts to flatten out at about 2. So we can pretty much maximize cholesterol blocking at around 2 grams, 2,000 milligrams. The standard American diet has been measured as low as 78 milligrams a day. Here's like a model American Heart Association diet, and this is how high folks get eating a plant-based diet, higher than any other diet pattern reported. That could get you a good 5% cholesterol reduction. But there's definitely room to bump that up further if necessary. Those who have improved their diet so much they're no longer eating any cholesterol should be acing their cholesterol tests, but in rare cases your body might not be able to get rid of enough endogenous production, and so doubling phytosterol intake could easily double LDL reduction down to 10%, which could double heart disease risk reduction. In terms of whole food sources to maximize cholesterol reduction, seeds provide the most, especially sesame, and then nuts, especially pistachio, and then legumes like peanuts. Though nuts and seeds are packed with phytosterols, Phytosterols are typically prescribed in butter form. I kid you not. Or in margarine, even worse. For those wanting to lower their heart disease risk, eating trans fats is the last thing you need. Right? Eating margarine to get phytosterols is like eating fish to get omega-3s. Right? Remember, food is a package deal. By choosing plant-based sources, we can get the nutrients we want without trans fats or mercury. Eating nuts and seeds offers the good without the bad. And studies show smaller, more frequent doses may be more effective than one big dose in a spread or a pill, which makes total sense, right? Given the trash picker analogy, we want to have phytosterols constantly flowing through our gut throughout the day, so they'll continue to keep stuffing the bins of our intestinal lining cells, allowing excess cholesterol to pass. Another reason that pills may not work as well is that we need fat to optimally absorb phytosterol, so that's why they package it in margarine spreads. But nature put phytosterols right where you need it, in nuts and seeds, which have more than enough fat. But now there's like phytosterol-fortified orange juice and lemonade, and like with the pills, we would not expect phytosterols to be as effectively absorbed. Nuts are packed with nutrition, but they're also packed with calories. Why then, as I've explored in previous years, don't nuts make people fat? There's been 18 clinical trials reviewed to date on nuts and weight, after adding, in some cases, entire handfuls of nuts to people's daily diet. In 2 of the 18 studies, people actually gained a few pounds, but in 14 of the other studies, there was no significant weight change reported, and in 3, people actually lost weight. How is that even possible? Well, these were clinical trials where people put on added nuts for just a few weeks or months. What about long term? Maybe in the short run, nuts don't lead to weight gain, but what about after years of eating nuts? Well, that's been looked at 6 different ways, in studies lasting from 1 year to 8 years, the Harvard Nurses' Health Study. 1 found no significant change. The other 5 out of 6 measures found significantly less weight gain and risk of abdominal obesity in those eating more nuts. How is it possible that 90% of studies ever done on nuts and weight gain showed, at the very least, no weight gain? Where did the nut calories go? The vast majority of studies on daily nut consumption and weight have shown no significant weight gain in the short or long term. But doesn't that violate some pesky law of the physical universe? Conservation of energy isn't just a good idea, it's the law, the first law of thermodynamics. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It is a law that cannot be broken even by the most hardened nut cases. Calories can't just disappear. One solution offered to the mystery of the missing calories has been dubbed the pistachio principle. Maybe nuts are just such a pain to eat. For example, in-shell pistachios slow the rate of consumption because of increased preparation time, and this may permit greater metabolic feedback during the ingestive event that augments satiety with the potential to reduce the energy content of the eating event. Meaning, in-shell nuts slow you down so much it gives you time to think, hey, I'm eating, better not eat too much. Yeah, but what about shelled nuts? Well, you still gotta chew them. A study out of Japan suggested that increasing dietary hardness, meaning difficulty of chewing, was associated with lower waist circumference. Now, your jaws do burn some calories, but it's not much exercise. I guess if all you ate was, raw cabbage all day, you might lose some weight, but there ain't many calories to begin with. So it may just be the tedium of chewing that leads one to eat less. Then there's the fecal excretion theory. Many of the cell walls of chewed almonds, for example, remain intact in the digestive tract. So even though a nut may technically have a certain number of calories in it, maybe they just go out the other end and you don't absorb many of them. To test both these theories, all scientists would have to do is compare weight gain from nuts to weight gain from nut butters. Both the pistachio principle and the fecal excretion theory were put to the test recently by studying the effects of peanut processing on body weight. Let's feed a bunch of people a half cup of peanuts every day for a month, and another group will feed the same amount of nuts, but will grind them into peanut butter first. So half cup of peanuts worth of peanuts versus peanut butter. And that was added on top of whatever else they were eating in their regular diet. So calorie-wise, at the end of the month, they should have put on a few pounds. Well, as we saw before, in the whole nut peanut group, that just didn't happen. But that's why we have the peanut butter group, right? Not a lot of shelling or crunching necessary with peanut butter, and the cell walls of the peanuts were all ground up, all the oil released and made available for absorption. And they didn't go extra chunky. This was smooth peanut butter. So if the reason people don't gain weight on nuts is because of all that chewing or fecal fat loss, then the prediction would be that although the whole nut group may not pile on the pounds, the peanut butter group definitely would. But they didn't. Neither group gained the expected weight. The plot thickens. Maybe the reason why 90% of the relevant studies show no weight gain from nut consumption is that nuts are so satisfying, so satiating, so appetite-suppressing that throughout the rest of the day, totally unconsciously, we just eat less. So if researchers add a handful of nuts to our daily diet, totaling 200 calories, and they were just so filling that it displaced 200 calories of something else we would have normally eaten, then that could explain how one can remain in energy balance even though they just added a calorically dense food like nuts to one's daily diet. And hey, if you felt so satisfied you'd unintentionally ended up eating 250 calories less each day, then that could explain why in a few of the nut studies people actually lost weight. Recently, they tested walnuts. It has been proposed, mainly on the basis of observational studies, that nuts may provide superior satiation, may lead to reduced calorie consumption, but evidence from randomized interventional studies is lacking. Until now. They double-blinded the study by disguising the walnuts in a smoothie. The walnut-containing liquid meal contained walnuts, frozen mango, frozen strawberries, banana, frozen berries, and pineapple juice. Sounds good. Whereas the placebo liquid meal contained oil, mango, strawberries, banana, berries, and juice, and 40 drops of walnut flavoring. In fact, they made it so you literally couldn't tell the difference in blind taste tests. And they were made with the exact same number of calories. So if there was nothing special about nuts, then you should feel just as satiated either way. But no. After a few days on the placebo, the walnut-flavored smoothie, people just felt something was missing. Everyone drank their smoothies at breakfast, and then right before lunch, the folks that didn't get the real nuts felt significantly less full, less satiated, even after the no chewing and full fat absorption. So you can see how, if you had nuts for breakfast, you may very well unintentionally eat a smaller lunch than you otherwise would, so in this way, nuts could actually decrease daily caloric consumption. Yes, when we eat nuts, we lose some fat in our feces and have our appetite suppressed, but studies suggest that this just accounts for about 70% of the disappeared calories in nuts. Unless all the calories are accounted for, then we still should gain weight after nut consumption, especially in the long term, but that's not what the studies show. So what happens to that last 30%? Well, nuts appear to boost our metabolism, meaning that when we eat nuts, we burn more of our own fat to compensate. And indeed, in this study, those on the control diet were burning about 20 grams of fat overnight within their bodies on average. Not bad. That's like burning off 5 pats of butter. But the walnut group, eating the same number of calories, the same amount of fat, same everything, burned more like 31 grams of fat a day, 7 or 8 pats of butter's worth. Not too shabby, or should I say flabby. So the hard-to-crack nut of a mystery appears to have been solved. Of all the calories you eat in nuts, about 70% of them are apparently disappear through dietary compensation mechanisms, 10% are flushed away, and 20% may be lost due to increased fat burn, leaving us with no calories to pack on any pounds, just a whopping load of nutrition, and our risk of dying from heart disease cut in half. How do nuts boost fat burning within the body? A paper out of Texas A&M last year suggested it may be the arginine content of nuts. How does arginine get the job done? They're not sure. The underlying mechanisms are likely complex at molecular, cellular, and whole body levels. In other words, they have no clue. But they do review the evidence that it may involve the stimulation of mitochondrial biogenesis, more power plants per cell, and brown adipose tissue development, which is what our body uses to generate body heat, so we'd be converting more of our fat into heat. Either way, they suspect arginine to play an important role in fighting the current global obesity epidemic. Well then, where in the diet can we find arginine? I'll give you a hint. According to the CDC, 78 million Americans aren't getting enough. So you know the top few sources have got to be in healthy foods, because no one's getting any. And indeed, here's the list for the top 15 food sources of arginine you'd likely find in a typical store. Number 1, isolated soy protein, which is what they make veggie burgers and meat-free hot dogs and the like out of. Number 2, pumpkin seeds and squash seeds. Number 4, watermelon seeds. Isn't that crazy? Not as crazy as number 5, fried pork rinds. I'm not kidding. Maybe Americans should be getting more than I think. Number 6, barbecue flavor pork rinds. It must just concentrate in the skin. Number 7, sesame seeds. Number 8, peanuts. Number 9, soybeans. Number 10, peanut butter. And then tahini, sesame seed paste. Almonds. Number 13, pine nuts. Number 14, fava beans. And number 15, sunflower seeds. So, basically, soy, seeds, nuts, and beans for arginine. Although dried beluga whale meat evidently has a lot, the first non-pork rind animal food that you could actually find in a typical store clocks in the USDA database at number 95th down the list, bacon. What accounts for the thermogenic effect of nuts, their purported ability to boost metabolism such that one could potentially burn more fat just sleeping or sitting around? An explanation for this rise of resting energy expenditure is not obvious. The Texas A&M folks thought it was the arginine, but others recently suggested it may be a function of the flavonoid phytonutrients in nuts. Based on what kind of evidence? Studies like this. The effects of Concord grape juice on appetite, diet, and body weight. Just as nuts are calorically dense, yet don't seem to cause weight gain, Welch's was keeping their fingers crossed that the same would be found for purple grape juice. They had people guzzle down 2 cups a day for 3 months. Now, you gotta understand, Welch's grape juice has more sugar than Coca-Cola. 2 cups of purple grape juice contains the equivalent of 20 spoonfuls of sugar. The control group was basically given grape Kool-Aid, a substitute grape-flavored drink, same number of calories, same amount of sugar, but just no detectable phytonutrients. So at 2 cups a day, they were giving hundreds of extra calories a day to these people. Surely after 3 months, they'd gain a couple pounds. What do you think they found? The grape-flavored sugar water group did indeed gain a significant amount of weight. How could they not with all that extra added sugar in their diet? But the grape juice people didn't. In fact, are you ready for this? Their waist circumference significantly shrank. They appeared to burn away significantly more tummy fat by drinking grape juice. So maybe there is something to the theory put forth by the nut and green tea people that flavonoid phytonutrients are capable of increasing thermogenesis, heat generation, and fat oxidation. If true, then it's just one more reason to eat nuts and drink green tea, not grape juice. Instead, eat Concord grapes. Obesity is so rare among those eating plant-based diets, nutrition researchers have been desperate to uncover their secret. Yes, they tend to eat fewer calories, but not that many fewer. In the past, I've gone through a couple of theories that have emerged. Maybe it's because people eating plant-strong diets express more of the fat-shoveling enzyme inside the power plants, the mitochondria within their cells. Maybe it's because they grow different populations of good bacteria in their gut. Maybe it's because they're avoiding the obesogenic, endocrine-disrupting industrial pollutants in the meat supply. An obesity-causing virus in poultry may even be contributing. We're still not sure, but the theories keep coming. Here's the latest. Maybe it's the propionate. After all, what's one of the things that's only in plant foods, never in animal foods? Fiber. Animals have bones to hold them up, plants have fiber to hold them up. I thought fiber was defined, though, by our inability to digest it. Sure, we can't break it down, but the gazillions of good bacteria in our guts can. What do they make with it? Propionate, which gets absorbed into our bloodstream. So technically we can digest fiber, but just not without a little help from our little friends. What does propionate do? Well, it inhibits cholesterol synthesis. That's nice. It also appears to have a hypophagic effect, meaning it helps us eat less, apparently by slowing down the rate at which food empties from our stomachs, thereby making us feel fuller longer. Propionate may either regulate food intake or the generation of new fat cells, resulting in an overall anti-obesity effect. One of the many ways fiber-containing foods, meaning whole plant foods, can help us control our weight. Our friendly flora's digestion of fiber also yields another short-chain fatty acid called butyrate, which may fight against cancer by slowing the growth of colon cancer cells and activating programmed cancer cell death, as well as preventing cancer in the first place. Butyrate may explain why fiber-filled plant-based diets are so anti-inflammatory. A recent review concluded that butyrate seems to exert broad anti-inflammatory activities, and might be a good candidate to evaluate in the fight against obesity-associated and systemic inflammation in general. Now, they're alluding to using it as some kind of supplement, but we can produce more on our own naturally two ways. Number one, eating more plant foods, since it's a byproduct of fiber digestion, and number two, we can boost the number of butyrate-producing bacteria in our colon by eating more plant foods. Different butyrate production capacity in individuals according to diet. Not only do those eating vegetarian harbor more good bacteria, period, vegetarian fecal samples showed the highest number of copies of butyrate-producing genes. Other than fiber, what else do plants make that animals don't, that could help account for how dramatically slimmer those who eat plant-based diets tend to be? Phytonutrients. Mammals, including humans, harbor two main types of friendly gut bacteria: Bacteroidetes and Firmicutes. In terms of obesity, though, one appears friendlier than the other. There is mounting evidence that the gut flora is different in healthy patients than it is in obese patients, which primarily involves higher numbers of Firmicutes than Bacteroidetes phyla in the case of obesity and overweight. So just to keep them straight, you can remember fatter Firmicutes and bonier Bacteroidetes. Obese individuals appear to have more Firmicutes than Bacteroidetes in their guts. If you put people on a diet for a year, you can actually change the proportion. Give people certain antibiotics may actually trigger obesity because you're mucking around down there. How can we improve our ratio? Well, there is a class of phytonutrients called polyphenols that do two things. They preferentially feed Bacteroidetes, while at the same time suppressing the growth of Firmicutes. So the researchers were like, hey, maybe that's why the use of vinegar has been recommended for thousands of years for weight loss. What's it often made out of? Red wine vinegar, apple cider vinegar, both of which, look, grapes and apples, packed with polyphenols. The weight-lowering property of fruits, green tea, wine vinegar, and obese people may be partly related to the polyphenol content of them, which consequently changes the gut flora, which may consequently alter the balance between the two groups of Bacteroidetes and Firmicutes bacteria in the favor of Bacteroidetes. It's funny, naysayers of the power of phytonutrients often point to studies like this showing that up to 85% of those wonderful blue anthocyanins in blueberries end up in your colon unabsorbed. But that may be exactly where some of the magic happens. If phytonutrients can alter gut flora in a way that helps people lose weight, then you'd think people eating diets based on plants would have significantly different colon populations, and yes, indeed, that's something that's been known for 4 decades, and may help explain why those eating plant-based diets tend to be slimmer. Another reason vegetarian eating patterns have been tied to better weight management may be the water content of plant foods. Fruits and vegetables average about 80 to 90% water. Just as fiber can bulk up the volume of foods without adding calories, so can water. Cognitive experiments have shown that people tend to eat a certain volume of food, and so when that volume is mostly water, they don't end up gaining as much weight. But even if you take out the visual component, instead just stick a tube down people's throats and feed them whatever volumes of food you want, if you add more water to their stomach, they tend to eat less, perhaps because of the stretch receptors in their stomach sending signals to the brain saying, we've had enough. Scientists have identified a multitude of ways our body controls our appetite, and a good thing, because if we were off just a few percent every day, that could have huge impacts on our weight over the years. If water is so helpful, why can't you just eat a steak with the glass of water? It doesn't work. You feel more full during the meal, but you end up eating the same amount of calories throughout the day, unless they found you preload. Drinking water with a meal doesn't seem to help control calories, but drinking a big glass of water a half an hour before a meal might. Thus, it appears that water on its own may be effective at increasing satiety and decreasing intakes for some population groups when drunk before, but not with a meal. Ice water may be even better, or even just ice. Look, water has 0 calories. Ice has less than 0, since our bodies have to warm it up. From the Annals of Internal Medicine, the ice diet, using simple thermodynamic calculations of how much heat our body would have to generate to take an ice cube up to body temperature, they conclude eating a quart of ice, like a really, really big snow cone with no syrup, could rob our body of more than 150 calories, the same amount of energy as the calorie expenditure in running for a mile. Sound too good to be true? It is actually, as Ray Cronise talks about in his body hacking work with thermogenics. You may just be diverting some of the body's waste heat. If one really wants to use chronic mild cold stress to lose weight, turning down one's thermostat or wearing fewer layers outside may be more effective in the long run than drinking slushies of slush. When trying to lose weight, which is most important, diet or exercise? This is what a survey found recently. The vast majority of those trying to lose or maintain weight believe that both monitoring food and beverage consumption and physical activity are equally important in weight management and weight loss. Most people go with equally important, then exercise, and then diet, and most people are wrong. Identified as one of the most common misconceptions about obesity in this recent review, the confusion about the leverage of exercise on body weight. Unfortunately, the energy balance equation, calories in have to equal calories out, suggests that energy intake and energy expenditure occupy equivalent roles in determining energy balance, when in fact, the factors governing energy intakes influence the energy balance far more powerfully than the factors determining resting energy expenditures. What we put in our mouths is most important. For example, to walk off the calories found in a single pat of butter, you'd have to add an extra 700 yards to your stroll that evening. A quarter-mile jog for each sardine we put in our mouth, and that's just the edible part. And those who choose to eat 2 chicken legs better get out on their own 2 legs and run an extra 3 miles that day to outrun weight gain. And that's for steamed chicken, skin removed. Mainly because of its high energy density and fat content, meat consumption has been considered a determinant of weight gain. Yeah, but we looked at nuts, which are dense in calories and fat, and they didn't appear to contribute to weight gain at all, so let's not presume. Meat consumption and prospective weight gain in participants of the EPIC Panacea study. What is that? Hundreds of thousands of men and women across 10 countries with weight gain measured over a 5-year period. What did they find? Total meat consumption was positively associated with weight gain in men and women, in normal weight and overweight subjects, and in smokers and non-smokers. Conclusion: our results suggest that a decrease in meat consumption may improve weight management. And this was after adjusting for initial weight, physical activity, education level, smoking status, total energy intake. Wait a second. What? That's the kicker, right? The link between meat and weight gain remained even after controlling for calories. One would assume that, sure, meat is associated with weight gain because it's so packed with calories, and so you just get more calories in your daily diet compared to those eating vegetarian, and so more weight gain. But no, it's even more than that. This was after controlling for caloric intake, meaning if you have two people eating the same amount of calories, the person eating more meat may gain more weight. In fact, they even calculated how much more. An intake of 250 grams of meat a day, like a steak, would lead to an annual weight gain 422 grams higher than the weight gain experienced with the same calorie diet with lower meat intake. After 5 years, the weight gain would be about 5 pounds more. Same calories, yet 5 pounds more eating meat. And steak was nothing. The strongest relationship with annual weight change, weight gain, was observed for poultry. Let's say you start out normal weight and eat a hamburger every day. This is how much extra weight beyond what's already in the calories you'd put on every year. What if instead you had the same amount of calories of processed meat, say a ham sandwich with 3 deli slices of ham on it? You'd gain this much extra, whereas just a half of a chicken breast puts you up to here, though the poultry effect was attenuated, evidently, if you remove people who were previously sick or who lied about their diet. In conclusion, our results indicate that meat intake is positively associated with weight gain, and this association persisted after adjustment for total energy intake and underlying dietary patterns. Our results are therefore in favor of the public health recommendation to decrease meat consumption for health improvement. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association was not happy about the findings of the EPIC study, one of the largest studies on human nutrition ever performed, which, as we've seen, recently found that those who eat any kind of meat go on to gain significantly more weight than those who eat less, even eating the same number of calories. One of the Beef Association speakers wrote to the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition complaining that meat intake's influence on body fatness cannot be assessed without measurement of body fat. Maybe, the cattlemen argued, the pounds that the meat eaters packed on was muscle mass, not fat. Maybe they were becoming beefier, not fatter. Fine, the researcher answered. We'll not just measure obesity, but abdominal obesity, the worst kind. So they took a small sample out of the study, a sample of 91,000 people, and found the exact same thing, even eating the same number of calories. The more meat we eat, the more our belly grows. And they even calculated how much our waistline could be predicted to expand based on our daily meat consumption, so one can kind of plan ahead for the new pants one might need to buy. Though nothing comes close to the EPIC study in scale, other recent studies have found the same thing. In Spain, nut and vegetable consumption was recently associated with having a slimmer waist, and meat product consumption with a wider one. Another new study, this one out of Belgium, it concluded that animal protein intake was associated with bigger body mass index and waistline, whereas plant protein intake was associated with a smaller BMI and slimmer waist, indicating that the intakes of plant protein could offer a potential protective effect against overweight and obesity. Body mass index is a better predictor of disease than body weight, since it takes height into account, but doesn't say what or where that mass is. Bodybuilders can have huge BMIs, especially since muscle is heavier than fat. Doesn't mean they're obese. It's now accepted that health risks can be determined as much by the relative distribution of the excess fat as by its total amount. It's not so much body fat, but visceral body fat, abdominal fat, the fat around our internal organs that most increases our risk of dying prematurely. All these women have the exact same BMI, but it's the people with the so-called apple shape that tend to live the shortest. Now, waist circumference takes care of both the what and where of the weight, but can also be affected by height. Enter the waist-to-height ratio. Move over BMI, we now have WHR. A systematic review of waist-to-height ratio as a screening tool for the prediction of cardiovascular disease and diabetes was recently published, the first of its kind, concluding WHR was superior and the cutoff should be 1 to 2, supporting the simple public health message: keep your waist circumference to less than half your height. It's cheaper, right, more convenient, no scale required, and most importantly, more sensitive as an early warning sign of health risks to come. Just take a cloth measuring tape and measure halfway between the top of your hip bones and the bottom of your rib cage. Stand up straight, but breathe deep, exhale, let it all hang out, and that measurement should be half your height. And if it's not, we should cut down on our consumption of meat, as we just went over, but also our consumption of refined plant foods, whereas at least 3 servings a day of whole grains was recently associated with a slimmer waist in the Framingham Heart Study. Epidemiological studies, particularly those like EPIC, following such large populations, can offer tremendous insight into critical public health questions, such as what we should eat, what we shouldn't eat, to minimize our risk of falling prey to the epidemics of chronic disease currently plaguing the world. But the gold standard is the interventional study, where you put people on a certain diet and track what happens. It's easy to get people to make little changes, especially if you pay them. Getting people to add grape juice to their daily diet, or some nuts, as we've seen, a piece of cake, especially if that's what you're trying to get people to eat. But increasingly, there's building evidence that to achieve big changes in our health, we need to achieve big changes in our diet. Moderation kills. Like with cholesterol, right? You want to lower your risk? Sure, you can tweak, but if you want to eliminate your risk, or reverse the disease, you really have to take healthy eating seriously. But how are you going to get people to commit to a healthy diet? Tell them the Bible told them to. Chapter 1, verses 8 through 16 of the prophet Daniel, best known for his lion's den rather than his budding role as nutritional scientist, he resolved not to defile himself with the king's meat. The official said, "No way," and so he told the guard, "Look, put it to the test. Round up some test subjects and put them on a plant-based diet, see how they do." In the King James Version, they use the word vegetables, but the original Hebrew, hazeroim, can translate into a broader definition. And what do you know? They looked healthier and better nourished than whatever the king used to be feeding them, and so Daniel got his veggies. 2,700 years later, researchers at the University of Memphis decided it was time to try to replicate the study. Evidently not completely satisfied with the scientific rigor of the dietary trial presented in Daniel 1, 8 through 16, researchers in Tennessee published 2 papers recently detailing a series of parallel experiments on a 21-day, all-you-can-eat diet devoid of animal products and preservatives, and inclusive of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. In other words, food intake in accordance with a stringent vegan diet. The purpose of the studies were to determine the effect of a 21-day Daniel fast on both biomarkers of antioxidant status and oxidative stress, as well as the efficacy of the Daniel fast to improve markers of the lion's den of metabolic and cardiovascular disease risk. No surprise that a diet composed of whole plant foods improves several risk factors for metabolic and cardiovascular disease, as well as an improvement in selected biomarkers of antioxidant status and oxidative stress, including metabolites of nitric oxide, which I've talked about before. Participants experienced meaningful improvements in blood pressure, cholesterol, insulin levels, insulin resistance, C-reactive protein, were all lowered to a clinically meaningful extent. And this was in a young, healthy population. Imagine the miracles it could do for people who are really hurting. This study extends the findings of other plant-based diets by documenting the impact of a strict vegan diet on multiple measures of oxidative stress and antioxidant capacity. Of course, if instead of a biblical Daniel fast they had called it a strict vegan diet, they probably would not have gotten a compliance rate of 98.7%, especially in Tennessee. 1 billion people in the world are now overweight. And that's great news for the $13 billion weight loss supplement industry. Reported at the International Congress on Obesity in Stockholm recently, a review of common slimming supplements versus placebo, and not one worked better than the sugar pills. No evidence that any of these food supplements provide adequate treatment for weight loss, so looks like we'll just have to stick with food. That was the conclusion reached in a similar review out of the Weight Management Center at Johns Hopkins recently, which ended with this. It is fitting to highlight that perhaps the most general and safest quote-unquote alternative approach to weight control is to substitute low-energy density foods for high-energy density and processed foods, thereby reducing total energy intake. In other words, more whole plant foods and fewer animals and junk. By taking advantage of the low energy density and health-promoting effects of plant-based foods, one may be able to achieve weight loss, or at least assist weight maintenance, without cutting down on the volume of food consumed or compromising its nutrient value. To snack or not to snack? A review was recently published on the accumulated research about eating frequency and both weight and health. Maybe we should eat throughout the day to reduce hunger, increase our metabolic rate, mobilize our body fat, or maybe snacking will just lead us to overeat. What does the science say? What do you think? A few big meals a day, or smaller, more frequent meals throughout the day for weight management and optimal health? According to the best available science, it doesn't seem to matter. Overall, current evidence does not suggest that manipulating eating frequency greatly benefits weight and health. What we eat is more important than how often we eat it. If you do like snacking, though, a new study, thanks to the California Prune Board, suggests that, what else, prunes may be a particularly good choice, given the satiating power of prunes, which they found, like with nuts, to compensate for the majority of their calories. Recently, researchers in Spain wondered what would happen if they replaced much of the refined olive oil in people's diets with extra virgin olive oil, or walnuts, or almonds. What were the effects on people's cardiovascular risk factors after a month on each of the different diets? Same people, but 3 different months' diets, different only by the main source of fat, and this is what they found. The people in the nut groups did significantly better, dropping their total cholesterol about 7%, knocking about 20 points off their bad cholesterol. However, the extra virgin olive oil did do somewhat better than the refined olive oil, presumably because it retains a few more phytosterols, but nuts and seeds remain the best source of fat. Whole food sources of fats, like everything else, tend to be preferable. One can think of extra virgin olive oil like fruit juice. Right? It's got nutrients, but the calories you get are relatively empty compared to the whole fruit. Olives are, after all, fruits. Right? You fresh squeeze them, and you get olive juice, less nutrition than the whole fruit, but then it gets even worse. They throw away what's called the olive wastewater, which contains all the water-soluble nutrients in olives. So the oil just has a small fraction of the nutrition of the whole fruit. So why not just eat the olives? Well, the problem is that they're soaked in brine, such that a dozen olives could take up half your sodium intake for the day. So I should suggest eating them only in moderation. As I progressed through medical training, I could see the ground was definitely shifting. The conversation moved from treating and reversing individual cases of heart disease to an overdue requiem for palliative cardiology altogether, the year I graduated from medical school. In other words, resolving the whole coronary artery disease epidemic altogether through plant-based nutrition. So what's the latest? Ornish's first major study more than 20 years ago only included 28 patients on his plant-based diet. 28 patients that would go on to change medicine as we know it forever, but 28 patients nonetheless. Since then, he's published studies involving the reversal of heart disease in thousands of patients, proving that it can not only work in hippie California, but in Nebraska as well. Now, Ornish's Just diet. It's a combo of a low-fat, whole foods, plant-based diet rich in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, peas, lentils, and soy, along with moderate exercise, walking a few hours a week, and in addition to stress management. Now, other studies have focused exclusively on diet. For example, Neil Barnard's team recently published the first workplace intervention study, Geico Corporate Headquarters. A couple months of just educating employees about the wonders of a plant-based diet, along with a few healthier options in the cafeteria, without changes in exercise, compared to a control worksite where employees were kept in the dark. And within a few months, with their newly acquired knowledge is power, the pounds and inches came off. Before Esselstyn, before Ornish, there was Nathan Pritikin, an unlikely candidate to launch a lifestyle medicine revolution. He wasn't a doctor, wasn't a dietitian, he was an engineer. And so when he got diagnosed with heart disease in his 40s, he was not satisfied with the medical profession's fatalism. This was, after all, a time when doctors still preferred camels. So he did his own research. He experimented, he studied the diets of cultures around the world, particularly Uganda, and finally arrived at a plant-based diet, dropping his cholesterol from 280 down to 94, reversing his own heart disease before going on to do the same for thousands of others, before he tragically lost his 28-year battle with radiation-induced leukemia. Before he died, though, he directed that his body be autopsied. He wanted to show the world what his diet could do. The autopsy findings were published in the New England Journal of Medicine. 30 years after his original heart disease diagnosis, considered incurable at the time, his coronary arteries were found to be soft and pliable and widely patent throughout. In a man 69 years old, the near absence of atherosclerosis and complete absence of its effects are remarkable. Pritikin's work has continued through his research foundation, which has really done some elegant work. They put people on different diets, drip their blood on cancer cells growing in a petri dish, and then just stand back and see whose blood is better at suppressing cancer growth. They were among the ones that published that study showing the blood of those on a vegan diet was dramatically less hospitable to cancer. Even the blood of those on the standard American diet fights cancer. If it didn't, everyone would be dead. It's just that the blood of those eating vegan fights about 8 times better. The blood of those on the standard American diet slows cancer growth down about 9%. Put people on a plant-based diet for a year, though, and their blood just tears it up. The blood circulating within the bodies of vegans has nearly 8 times the stopping power when it comes to cancer cell growth. Now, this was for prostate cancer, the most common cancer among American men, followed by lung, then colon. In women, it's breast cancer, then lung and colon. So the Pritikin researchers tried duplicating the study with women using breast cancer cells instead. Now, they didn't want to wait a whole year to get the results, though, so they figured they'd see what the diet could do in 2 weeks. First, they took samples of blood to get a baseline, and then they asked a dozen women to eat a plant-based diet for 14 days. Then they took a second sample of blood from those same women at the end of the 2 weeks, so they'd kind of serve as their own controls. Now, it was time to pit breast cancer cells against the defenses of these women before and after eating healthy. They dripped their before and after blood upon 3 different lines of human breast cancer. For example, MCF7 stands for Michigan Cancer Foundation. It's a estrogen receptor-positive invasive ductal carcinoma, taken from a 69-year-old Caucasian woman, Sister Catherine Francis, a nun in the convent of the Immaculate Heart of Mary in Monroe, Michigan. This is the before, cancer cell growth powering away at 100%, and then this is after, eating a plant-based diet for 14 days. Now, slowing down cancer growth rate is nice, but getting rid of cancer cells completely is even better. This is the before, measuring cancer cell death. This is the after, pre and post plants. The same blood that was now coursing through their bloodstream gained the power to significantly slow down and stop breast cancer cell growth thanks to just 2 weeks of eating a plant-based diet. What kind of blood do we want in our body? What kind of immune system? Do we want blood that just kind of rolls over when cancer cells pop up? Or do we want blood circulating to every nook and cranny in our body that has the power to slow down and stop them? This dramatic strengthening of cancer defenses was after 14 days of a plant-based diet and exercise. They were out walking 30 to 60 minutes a day. Although Pritikin started out reversing chronic disease through diet alone, later, to his credit, he added an exercise component as well. And it's great for his patients, but scientifically it makes it hard to tease out which is doing what. Maybe the only reason their blood started becoming so effective at suppressing cancer growth was because of the exercise. Maybe the diet component had nothing to do with it. So they put it to the test. They set up an experiment with 3 groups. The first group did nothing, control group. The second did diet and exercise, and the third group was just exercise. The diet and exercise group had been put on a plant-based diet for 14 years, along with moderate exercise, just like walking every day. The second group was just exercise, but they were hardcore, right? Not just exercise, but 14 years of daily, strenuous, hour-long exercise like calisthenics. But they ate the standard American diet. In fact, they were actually overweight. They'd been killing themselves in the gym every day for 14 years, and still their BMI averaged 26.5, whereas those on the Plant Strong diet were ideal body weight. But let's see who's better at fighting cancer. The researchers wanted to know, if you exercise hard enough, long enough, can you rival some strolling vegans? They took Petri dishes brimming full of human cancer cells and dripped blood from each of the 3 groups on different dishes to see whose blood was better at suppressing cancer growth. What do you think they found? Whose blood was better at killing cancer cells? This is a graph measuring cancer cell apoptosis, or programmed cell death. Cancer cells programmed to commit suicide. It's one way our body gets rid of cancer cells. Basically, our immune system taps them on the shoulder and says, look, you know there's only one way this is going to end, don't you? Well, you take the honorable way out. It'll be quicker, easier. If they start the chemo and everything, it's going to get messy. Take the easy way out and just kill yourself, which our immune system is sometimes capable of convincing cancer cells to do. Here's the blood of the control group. Not very persuasive. Cancer's like, take your programmed cell death and shove it. And as we saw before, here's the effect of the blood of those in the Pritikin group. After 14 years on a plant-based diet, you can bet their bloodstream was clearing cancer cells left and right. But what about the hardcore exercise group in the middle? Did they clear cancer just as good as the Pritikin group? If that's the case, then it wasn't diet at all, right? The exercise was a critical component. Were they somewhere in the middle, showing the exercise helped, but not as good as a plant-based diet group? Or were they down there with the control group? Maybe exercise helped with other things, but just not at killing cancer. And what they found was this. Exercise helped, no question, but literally 5,000 hours in the gym was no match for a plant-based diet. Here's an actual photomicrograph of the cells in the control Petri dish, stained so they release light when they die. As you can see in the control group, there were a few cancer cells dying. Even if you're a couch potato eating fried potatoes, your body's not totally defenseless. But here's the hardcore, strenuous exercise group, right? Cancer cells dying left and right. But nothing appears to kick cancer butt more than a plant-based diet. If a healthy diet can slow down the abnormal growth of prostate cancer cells, what about the abnormal growth of normal prostate cells? Benign prostatic hyperplasia, BPH, enlargement of the prostate gland, which surrounds the urethra as it exits the bladder. If the gland gets too enlarged, it can cut down on the normal flow of urine, so you can be left with hesitant flow, a weak stream, inadequate emptying of the bladder. So you have to keep getting up at night to drain off as much as you can at a time. Can leave you dribbling, irritated, can lead to urine retention, so you got a stagnant pool in there that can get infected, ejaculation problems. In the United States, it affects about 50% of men in their 50s, 80% of men in their 80s. It's an epidemic, 16 million American men. And then it tends to just get worse, growing larger by the day. $1 billion a year is spent on drugs to treat it, another billion on supplements. Surgery is up next, lots of different Roto-Rooter-type techniques with innocent-sounding acronyms like TUMPT, tuna, or TURP, disguising the rather unpleasant reality. The T's stand for transurethral, meaning up the penis, with an instrument that looks like this, a resectoscope. Then you're left with words like microwave thermotherapy and needle ablation. They just tunnel up there and start burning. Sometimes they use lasers to burn out a shaft. And these are the minimally invasive options. The gold standard remains transurethral resection of the prostate, where they just go up there and core it out with a loop of wire. Side effects include post-operative discomfort. You think? There's got to be a better way. It's so common in the Western world that most doctors just assume it's just an inevitable consequence of aging. But let's look around the world. In China, a medical college in Beijing reported that there was not 80% of the population affected, but about 80 cases, period. 84 cases over a 15-year time span. It used to be considered a rare occurrence in China, but the incidence of both BPH and prostate cancer started rising quickly. And now, the incidence of prostate enlargement in China is similar to that in developed countries. Why? Well, the researchers suggest it's for the same reason for their skyrocketing cancer rates, a shift from their more traditional plant-based diet to one with more animal fat and animal protein. So BPH may be like heart disease, a natural occurrence not of aging, but of eating an unhealthy diet. It may only be standard to get an enlarged prostate and die of a heart attack for those eating the standard American diet. People eating healthy diets may be familiar with TVP, textured vegetable protein, used for making a mean veggie chili, blissfully ignorant that for others the acronym may stand for transurethral electrovaporization of the prostate. According to a recent review, the most notable development in the epidemic of prostate enlargement and lower urinary tract symptoms is the recognition that modifiable lifestyle factors substantially influence the natural history of these conditions. These are the factors associated with increased risk: obesity, diabetes, meat, and fat. And some associated with decreased risk: exercise, moderate alcohol consumption, and vegetables. Which vegetables? Garlic and onions appear to help. I like how they call them onion users. Cooked vegetables appear to work better than raw, so maybe it's the carotenoids. And legumes were also found protective: peas, beans, and lentils. And flax seeds appear so powerful that they may be used to both prevent and treat the condition. A randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial that found that flax phytonutrients not only alleviate BPH symptoms, but their efficacy appeared comparable to the drugs we spend $1 billion on without the side effects. Flax seeds also work against prostate cancer. These researchers had men who were about to get their prostates removed eat 3 tablespoons of flax seeds a day for the few weeks before surgery. They were skeptical that they would observe any differences in tumor biology between the flaxseed fortified diet treated groups, patients, and the controls with such a short-term dietary intervention. But they found significantly lower cancer proliferation rates and significantly higher rates of apoptotic cancer cell death, cancer cell suicide I've talked about. Thus, these findings suggest that a flaxseed-supplemented low-fat diet may have an effect on prostate cancer biology. Just a few things have been found associated with a significantly increased risk for the disease: refined grains like white bread, also eggs, and poultry, which appeared even worse than red meat or desserts. Although these data are observational, more research is necessary. There's little, if any, downside to promotion of healthy lifestyle interventions: weight loss, exercise, decreasing meat and fat intakes, and increasing vegetable intake among those with prostate problems, particularly since these interventions possess proven benefits to overall and cardiovascular health. And how about before you're a prostate patient? lifestyle habits associated with a decreased risk of developing clinical BPH are also highly likely to be beneficial in reducing the risk of erectile dysfunction, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. For this reason, urologists should encourage all men to undertake a prostate-healthy lifestyle. If individual plant foods reduce the risk of prostate enlargement, what about an entire diet composed of plant foods? Here's where the Pritikin researchers step in again. Remember how they dripped the before and after blood on prostate cancer cells? Well, they did the same thing for BPH, took a bunch of men, put them on a plant-based diet for just 2 weeks, and then dripped their blood on normal prostate cells in a petri dish, and saw, as with the cancer, a significant drop in growth, and so quickly, too. The flip side, of course, is, yeah, it's amazing you can see an effect after just 2 weeks on a healthy diet, but if they ended the study after just 2 weeks, how do you know the effect doesn't just go away? Maybe your body accustoms itself to a healthy diet, and prostate cell growth rates start slowly creeping back up. Well, they looked at that. They tested blood of people that had been eating plant-based diets for up to 28 years straight, and found the same thing, both against benign prostate cell growth and, as we saw, against cancerous prostate cell growth. As long as we continue to eat healthy, growth rates go down, and they stay down. Why do centenarians escape cancer? People who live to be over 100 years old. As we get older, our risk of getting and dying from cancer grows year by year, but once you hit around 85, 90, your cancer risk starts to drop. That kind of makes sense. I mean, if you didn't get it by then, maybe you're never going to get it. If you live that long, maybe it's a sign there's something special about you. It seems that centenarians are endowed with a particular resistance to cancer. So what's their secret? Well, every day, 50 billion of our cells die, and every day 50 billion new ones are born. There's a balance, otherwise our body would atrophy, shrink, or get too big and crowded. Now, sometimes we need to grow, like when we're a baby, or that growth spurt around puberty. Right? Our cells don't get larger when we grow up, they get more numerous. A child's hand may only be made up about 50 billion cells, and may have to add a half trillion or so growing up. Once we've already grown up, we don't want a lot of extra cells hanging around. I mean, we still need our cells to grow and divide, right? Out with the old, in with the new. We just don't want to be making more cells than we're putting out to pasture. When you're a kid, extra growth is good, but when you're an adult, extra growth can mean a tumor. How do our cells know when to tip the balance in favor of more dividing and less dying, and when to come back into balance? Well, a key signal is IGF-1, a growth hormone called insulin-like growth factor number 1. Levels go up when you're a kid, so you grow, and then come back down. Should your levels stay a bit too high as an adult, though, there's this constant message to our cells. Grow, 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 divide, don't die, keep going, keep growing. And so, not surprisingly, the more IGF-1 we have in our bloodstream, the higher our risk for cancer. More IGF-1, more prostate cancer. More IGF-1, more breast cancer. Of course, it's not the original tumor that tends to kill you, it's the metastases. IGF-1 is a growth factor. It helps things grow, so it helps cancer cells break off from the main tumor, migrate into surrounding tissues, and invade the bloodstream. What do you think helps breast cancer get into the bone? IGF-1. And the liver, IGF-1. Lung, brain, lymph nodes, IGF-1. Helps transform normal cells into cancer cells in the first place, then helps them survive, proliferate, self-renew, grow, migrate, invade, stabilize into new tumors, and even helps hook the blood supply up to the new tumor. IGF-1 is a growth hormone that makes things grow. That's what it does. But too much growth when we're all grown up can mean cancer. You may have seen this recent New York Times story about a rare genetic defect that leads to a type of dwarfism. That's IGF-1 deficiency. Their growth factor levels are so low they only grow this tall, but they almost never get cancer. Here's the IGF-1 levels in their non-affected relatives compared to those with the condition. Now let's look at their respective cancer rates. About 20% of their relatives died of cancer, which is pretty standard. And the percentage of those with IGF-1 deficiency dying of cancer? 0. Not a single person in the study. Here's what non-affected family members die of. The usual: heart disease, cancer, stroke. The folks with IGF-1 deficiency may die of a lot of things. They actually get hit by cars more, were recorded tripping downstairs, so 20% death from accidents, but they never died of cancer. So scientists began thinking, hey, why not have the best of both worlds? Have all the growth factor you need as a kid, so you grow to a normal height, but then, as soon as you obtain a normal adult stature, keep your IGF-1 levels low. Keep your cell life and death balance sheets balanced. And we can do that through dietary manipulation. Remember the Pritikin experiment? You put people on a plant-based diet and exercise, and as little as 12 days, you can turn their bloodstream into a cancer cell fighting machine. Here's the before picture. A layer of breast cancer cells is laid down in a petri dish, and then blood from women eating the standard American diet is dripped on them. And as you can see, even people eating crappy diets have some ability to break down cancer. But after just 12 days eating healthy, blood was drawn from those same women, dripped on another carpet of breast cancer cells, and this is what you're left with. Right? Their bodies cleaned up. You can also look at it another way. This is what's called eternal deoxynucleotide transferase, DUTP, nick end labeling, or tunnel imaging, which measures DNA fragmentation, cell death. Dying cells show up as white spots. So again, this is the before, what the blood of your average woman can do to breast cancer cells. It can kill a few. But then, after 12 days of healthy plant-based living, their blood can do this. This is that programmed cancer cell death. After eating healthy, their own bodies were able to reprogram the cancer cells, forcing them into early retirement. It's like you're an entirely different person inside. How does a simple dietary change make one's bloodstream so inhospitable to cancer in just a matter of days? That was the next question they set out to answer, and they finally did in 2011. Here we sought to determine the underlying mechanisms for this anti-cancer effect. Well, what they came up with was IGF-1. If you measure the blood levels of insulin-like growth factor 1 before and after 11 days on a plant-based diet with exercise, IGF-1 levels significantly drop, and IGF-1 binding protein levels significantly rise. That's one way our body tries to protect itself from cancer, from excessive growth, by releasing a binding protein into the bloodstream to tie up IGF-1. It's like our body's emergency brake. Yeah, sure, in as little as 11 days, a healthy diet can reprogram our body to slow down IGF-1 production, but you still have all that IGF-1 circulating in your bloodstream from the bacon and eggs you had the week before. So your liver releases this snatch squad of binding proteins to take it out of circulation pronto. Exercise alone can drop IGF-1 levels, but you need that plant-based diet to get those kind of snatch squad levels. And so with that combination, 20% less IGF-1 and 50% more IGF-1 binding protein, no wonder there's such a dramatic cancer cell die-off after just a few days. So did they solve the riddle? Did they figure out how a plant-based diet shuts down cancer growth? Well, the definitive study wasn't published until recently. Same as last time, before and after a few weeks of a plant-based diet. Cancer cell growth drops, and programmed cancer cell death, shoots up. But then, here's the kicker. Remember how IGF-1 levels dropped? Well, what if you added back to the cancer the exact same level of amount of IGF-1 banished from your body because of the healthy diet? What if you added that back in with the cancer? It erases the diet and exercise effect. It's like you never started eating healthy at all. Now, if cancer growth just came back down to here, you'd be like, oh, okay, IGF-1 was part of it. But the fact that it eliminates the effects of the lifestyle changes suggests that it was the mechanism all along. Walking and eating a plant-based diet for just a few days lowers circulating IGF-1 levels, which then can reverse cancer growth. Just a few days of walking and eating whole healthy plant foods, and our IGF-1 levels drop low enough to reverse cancer cell growth. What if we stick with it? Going to some Pritikin spa and getting healthy for 2 weeks is one thing, but what about long term? Does your IGF-1 start to creep back up to standard American diet levels again? No. Here's after 11 days, and it just gets better. People eating plant-based diets for 14 years have half the IGF-1 in their bodies, and more than twice the amount of IGF-1 binding protein than those on the standard American diet. We know decreasing animal product consumption decreases our IGF-1 levels, but how low do you gotta go? How plant-based does our diet need to get? Well, let's look at IGF-1 levels in meat eaters versus vegetarians versus vegans. The aim of this study was to determine whether a plant-based diet is associated with a lower circulating level of IGF-1 compared with a meat-eating or lacto-ovo-vegetarian diet, and this is what they found. Only the vegans had significantly lower levels, and the same relationship found with IGF-1 binding capacity. Only the vegans were significantly more able to bind up excess IGF-1 in their bloodstreams. This was a study on women. What about vegan men? They found the same thing. So, even though vegan men tend to have significantly higher testosterone levels than both vegetarians and meat eaters, which can be a risk factor for prostate cancer, the reason plant-based diets appear to reverse the progression of prostate cancer may be due to how low their IGF-1 levels drop. So more testosterone, but less cancer. The bottom line is that male or female, just eating vegetarian did not seem to cut it. It looks like to get a significant drop in cancer-promoting growth hormone levels, one apparently has to eliminate animal products altogether. The good news is that given what we know about IGF-1s, we could predict that a low-fat vegan diet may be profoundly protective with respect to, for example, risk for postmenopausal breast cancer. What is the mechanism by which our diet can affect our levels of this cancer-promoting growth hormone IGF-1? Imagine you're a kid with some Tinker toys. Then Christmas come early, and you get one of those huge sets dumped down in front of you. All excited with this new load of building raw materials, you may really start scaling up. And basically, it's the same thing with your liver and insulin like growth factor 1. When you dump a load of protein on your body, your liver's like, whoa, look at all this. What are we going to do with it all? We can't just waste it. We got to do something with it. Let's just start growing stuff. Add a few new additions, maybe a new wing. So your liver decides to start pumping out IGF-1 to tell all the cells in the body, it's growing time. Be fruitful and multiply, spare no expense. Go crazy. Look how much excess protein we got to work with. The problem, of course, is that some of the new additions may be tumors. When you're a fully grown adult, cell growth is something we want to slow down, not accelerate. So one might imagine the goal would be to maintain adequate but non-excessive overall protein intake. But wait a second. Studies have found no association between total protein intake and IGF-1 levels. Doesn't that just go against everything I just said? But these studies didn't take into account animal versus plant protein. In this study of meat eaters, vegetarians, and vegans, they found no significant difference in IGF levels between people eating lots of protein compared to people eating less protein. But before ditching the theory that excessive protein intake boosts the levels of IGF-1, they decided to break it down into animal protein versus plant protein. Higher IGF-1 levels were just associated with animal protein intake. In fact, the plant protein seemed to decrease IGF-1 levels. So no wonder there was no net effect of total protein intake. Animal protein appears to send a much different signal to our livers than most plant proteins. So even those vegans eating the same amount of protein as meat eaters still had lower levels of the cancer-promoting hormone IGF-1. So it's apparently not about excessive protein in general, but about animal protein in particular. Why is animal protein associated with increased levels of the cancer-promoting growth hormone IGF-1, but not plant protein? Let's go back to the Tinker toy analogy. Let's say you're trying to build a really big pyramid. Instead of starting from scratch, a pile of little pyramids is dropped in front of you. Ooh, this makes things easier, and you start stacking them together. But what if you still want to build your big pyramid, but instead a pile of cubes were dropped at your feet? Now, you still have all the essential elements there. You could undo them all and rebuild them into little pyramids to build into your big pyramid. But you can imagine the cube pile might just not be as good a stimulus as the pyramid pile to instantly just want to start piling them together. Maybe you want to see what's on TV first or something. It's the same thing with our liver and insulin-like growth factor 1. With the exception of the animal protein gelatin, all proteins, plant and animal, contain all 9 essential amino acids, so pretty much all proteins in that sense are complete proteins. Other than Jell-O and marshmallows, there's basically no such thing as an incomplete protein. When you hear about high versus low quality proteins, what they're talking about are the relative proportions of the different essential amino acids. The more closely the proportion matches our own proteins, the higher quality it's considered. So when our liver gets hit with a big load of incoming animal proteins, it's like, hey, this is easy, right? Let's just send out IGF-1 to get cells dividing like crazy to use some of this up. It's like the pile of pyramids. It's meat, we're meat, let's just pile it on. Whereas when you get plant protein cubes, all the essential elements are there. Your body can break them down to all the essential amino acids it needs, but it just doesn't stimulate the same kind of real estate boon that animal protein does, so you don't get as many new cancer condos popping up in your body. That's my attempt at lay explanation, anyway. For any biochem geeks out there, basically, unlike the essentials, particularly arginine, the pyruvate precursors may be shunted into gluconeogenesis, oxidized into urea, and so tend to present less of a proteogenic stimulus. But back to me speaking English. There's only one truly quote-unquote perfect protein, and without a doubt the highest quality protein on the planet for us is human flesh. And failing that, though, any flesh will do. We don't practice species cannibalism. Instead, we practice kingdom cannibalism, right? Or fellow mammals class cannibalism. And by eating other animals, we're getting protein that more closely mirrors our own than bananas, but now we know that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. If animal proteins are bad because they boost our blood levels of the cancer promoter IGF-1, what about the few plant proteins that just coincidentally happen to have amino acid ratios similar to animal proteins, like soy? One of soy's selling points is that it has quote-unquote high-quality protein. But now we know that from a cancer perspective, higher quality may mean a higher quantity of cancer risk, thanks to IGF-1. Let's go back to this study. Those who ate a lot of animal protein had significantly higher levels of IGF-1, and those who ate a lot of non-soy plant protein had significantly lower levels, presumably because it substituted for some of the animal protein in their diets. The same thing might have happened a little with soy. Hey, at least you're not eating animal protein, but this was not a significant decrease, meaning if all we do is just swap out animal protein and swap in soy protein, we may not see that beautiful drop in IGF-1 enjoyed by those replacing animal protein instead with a variety of different plant proteins. Indeed, the more soy milk, for example, that vegan women drank, the higher their IGF levels tended to be, but the trend was only of borderline statistical significance, meaning it could have just been due to chance. To test this once and for all would require the combined might of both the Ornish and Pritikin research teams. We know what happens when men with active prostate cancer start eating a plant-based diet. The progression of their cancer appears to reverse, to get better. No drugs, no surgery, no radiation, just a vegan diet and other healthy lifestyle behaviors. Cancer markers in the control standard American diet group tend to get worse, and in the plant-based diet group, they tend to get better. The blood of those on a plant-based diet suppresses cancer growth about 8 times better, or we're talking change on a genetic level. Diet and lifestyle changes switching on and off gene expression, delaying or even avoiding the need for surgery and conventional chemoradiation altogether. I've already gone through those in videos past, but what if you did the same thing, men with prostate cancer, but this time half in the control group and half in not just a vegan diet group, but in a heavily soy-based vegan diet group? How much soy are we talking about? 7 to 18 servings a day for an entire year. That's like entire blocks of tofu, or 7 to 18 glasses of soy milk. It's like 4 quarts a day all year round. What do you think happened to their IGF levels at the end? The IGF-1 levels in the control group in the study didn't drop at all, started high, stayed high. In a varied vegan diet, protein from multiple plant sources, all different kinds of beans, whole grains, etc. After years, you can see IGF-1 levels drop like this from baseline. Now, what happened to the drowning in soy vegan group, though? Did their levels drop too? With that much added soy, the vegans in the study got literally pounds of more protein in their diets than the meat eaters, but it was all added plant protein. Soy, however, is one of those rare plants that mimics the protein profile of meat, so with that much more animal-type protein in their diet, were they even worse? Surprisingly, they ended up with values about the same as the meat eaters. But wait a second, in Asian countries where they eat the most soy, they traditionally had just a fraction of our breast and prostate cancer rates. Well, the researchers found something interesting. The isoflavones, the phytoestrogens in soy, may actually bump up production of IGF-binding protein. So even though they had similar levels of IGF in their blood, in those eating vegan, more of it may be bound up and unavailable to stimulate as much cancer growth. Also, even in China and Japan, they don't eat 7 to 18 servings of soy a day. So we know 7 to 18 servings of soy a day may neutralize some of the beneficial effects of avoiding animal protein. At the same time, studies have repeatedly found that women who eat lots of soy appear to have a lower risk of getting breast cancer, and a better chance of surviving breast cancer than those who don't eat soy. So is there some magic number of soy food servings we should shoot for? So far, we know that somewhere between 7 and 18 may not be so good, so more than 18 definitely gets the axe. This 2-year study found no effect on IGF levels of adding 2 servings of soy food daily, whether they were tofu, soy milk, soy nuts, or the concentrated soy isolate found in plant-based meats, protein bars, or protein powder. Still fine. Still got a big range here. This study suggested 5 to 10 servings a day was bad, increased IGF. So we're kind of slowly but surely narrowing down the kind of safety window. Same year in Japan, 3 servings a day cleared the IGF radar. And then that's it. That's all the science we have so far. So the bottom line is legumes should be part of everyone's daily diet, which means lentils, peas, and/or beans, ideally with each of our meals, of which soy is an excellent choice, but I recommend that we should probably stick to no more than 3 to 5 servings a day. We know excess cellular growth isn't so good when we're fully grown adults, since budding tumors may end up being the main beneficiaries of higher levels of circulating growth hormones. But in some circumstances, a little extra growth is sought after, particularly for men in this culture, though not exclusively. The growth hormone IGF-1 is the reason some dogs look like this, and others like this. But what about those who strive to be the big dog? Yes, lower circulating levels of IGF in vegans lowers cancer risk, but might that interfere with their accumulation of muscle mass? There certainly are lots of plant-based bodybuilders, but maybe they're the exception. To look like this, does one have to risk looking like this? True or false? Lower IGF-1 levels in vegans likely interferes with muscle accumulation. Is this fact, or is this fiction? Well, there's a couple of ways to attack that question. For example, what's the skeletal muscle mass like in acromegaly, people afflicted with giantism, where they have an IGF overload in the body? If IGF bulks up muscle, you'd think they'd be muscle-bound, but no, they don't have any more muscle on average than anyone else. What if you inject people with IGF-1? They injected women for a year and found no increase in lean body mass or grip, bench, or leg press strength. What about men? Basically, same thing. They had about a dozen 22-year-olds flex for 15 weeks under different hormonal milieus, and concluded that elevations in ostensibly anabolic hormones like IGF-1 with resistance exercise enhances neither training-induced muscle bulk nor strength. Thus, it seems that outside of genetically engineered mice or a cell culture dish or other animal models, that the search for the true role of the growth potential of IGF-1 in adult muscle growth is a vain one. So although it's never been directly tested, probably fiction. A review published recently makes an evolutionary argument for a plant-based diet, given the fact that we apparently evolved eating huge amounts of whole plant foods. 200,000 years ago, it's estimated that we consume 600 milligrams of vitamin C a day. That's the amount of vitamin C found in 10 oranges, the amount of vitamin E found in 2 cups of nuts, the amount of calcium found in 5 cups of collard greens. And they weren't milking mammoths or anything. That all came from their wild greens. 100+ grams of fiber. Now we're lucky if we get 20 a day. In fact, we were exposed to such a quantity of healthy whole plant foods, we as a species lost our ability to make vitamin C. We still actually have the vitamin C synthesis gene in our DNA, but our bodies just junked it, because why bother? Right? Why waste the energy? We were getting massive doses all day long, every day. The problem is now what happens when you take our evolutionary heritage, finely tuned over the millennia, and plop it down into meat and potato chip country. Advocates of the so-called paleo diet are certainly right in railing against refined and processed junk, but may just use it as an excuse to eat just loads of meat that bear little resemblance to the flesh of prehistoric wild animals. Just on the contaminant issue alone, recently in the Journal of the American Meat Science Association, a review was published cataloging the laundry list: arsenic, mercury, lead, cadmium, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, preservatives, veterinary drugs like the antibiotic residues. Given what's now in fish, for example, it would be impossible to follow the Paleolithic diet while avoiding the risks associated with consuming mercury in amounts in excess of the suggested EPA threshold. The paleo diet patients I saw in my practice weren't consisting on weeds and eating 100 grams of fiber a day. They were eating burgers, not bugs. Based in part on our evolutionary history, sufficient scientific evidence exists for public health policy to promote a plant-rich diet for health promotion. There is evidence of a link between a form of low-grade systemic inflammation and several chronic diseases. This subclass of inflammation has been labeled meta-inflammation, para-inflammation, or smoldering inflammation. Obesity is known to be associated with this form of inflammation, though this recent paper argues that obesity may be more of kind of canary in the coal mine. Well, if this inflammation is now known to underlie most, if not all, forms of chronic disease, what are some of the inducers of this inflammation? Well, that coal mine may actually be one: air pollution, rising CO2 levels, but also secondhand smoke, inactivity, too much activity, like marathon runners actually may be stressing their bodies too much, excessive alcohol, calories, fast food, the Western diet, saturated in trans fats, not enough fiber, and too much sugar, meat, and salt. Note, though, they specify domestic meat. Might wild game be healthier? One study comparing the meat of both captive and wild pheasants, for example, found significantly more saturated fat in the domesticated birds, which is one of the components blamed for helping trigger that meat-induced postprandial or after-meal inflammatory response, given the potent inflammatory effects of saturated fat. So wild animals would seem to be the least unhealthy meat option, but it wasn't until recently when we got any real evidence one way or the other. This group of Australian researchers compared the amount of inflammation triggered by modern meat, domesticated animal meat, compared to that triggered by kangaroo meat. They looked at 3 different inflammatory markers: tumor necrosis factor, interleukin-6, and C-reactive protein. Here's the regular meat: big spike in inflammation 1 hour, 2 hours after eating meat. No surprise, that's what animal fat does. But here's the kangaroo. Sure, still causes that smoldering meta-inflammation, but not as much as store-bought meat. given this new data suggesting that the consumption of flesh from wild animals causes less inflammation, those who continue to eat meat might benefit from switching to something like venison, but it depends on what kind of ammo you use. The potential for human dietary exposure to lead bullet fragments in venison from rifle-killed deer. Human consumers of wildlife killed with lead ammunition might be exposed to health risks associated with lead ingestion. They took X-rays of 30 eviscerated carcasses of white-tailed deer shot by hunters with the standard lead-core, copper-jacketed bullets under normal hunting conditions. For those thinking, well, wait a second, can't you just kind of dig out the bullet like you see in all those old westerns? Well, you don't understand modern ammunition. All carcasses showed metal fragments and widespread fragment dispersion. How many fragments? An average of 136. So they went to the store and scanned the resulting meat packages, revealing tiny metal fragments in the ground meat packages from 80% of the deer, and most of those fragments were lead. They conclude that people risk exposure to bioavailable lead from bullet fragments when they eat venison from deer killed with standard lead-based rifle bullets and processed under normal procedures. At risk in the United States are some 10 million hunters, their families, and low-income beneficiaries of venison donations. Thanks to the Chinese space program, scientists in Beijing recently published a formal nutritional analysis of what may be the healthiest animal to eat: insect food for astronauts, the nutritional value of insects for human consumption during deep space flights. More arginine than soybeans, more zinc than pumpkin seeds, more protein than even snail meat. The selling point, though, is their low saturated fat content, especially when they're baked, not fried. And 1 pound of powdered worms gets you all the vitamin B12 you need for the day. Could an African caterpillar be the new beefsteak? Just 3.5 ounces of caterpillars can provide all of an adult's recommended daily protein, along with iron, B vitamins, and other essential nutrients. And they're efficient. Whereas we waste about 90% of nutrients when we feed grains to cows, less than half the nutrition of edible plants is wasted when we route them through bugs. Described as an endless source of protein, but how do they taste? They're considered highly nutritious and also have a quote-unquote pleasant taste. What exactly do they taste like? Well, peoples have said that the taste of the beetles is varied. Just to compare it to something everyone's familiar with, they reported their similarity to octopus. The problem with edible insects is consumer acceptance. Entomophobia, for which scientists describe the public's irrational revulsion and fear of insects, noting that these attitudes are not helped at all by government regulations that refer to insect parts as filth, lumping them together with rodent droppings. Our irrational revulsion has even been called a type of social pollution. Westerners should become more aware of the fact that their bias against insects as food has an adverse impact, resulting in a gradual reduction in the use of insects without replacement of lost nutrition. Basically saying, hey, even this is better than getting them hooked on Spam and Twinkies. Not to oversell them, though, edible insects are not without their problems. Your supper can bite back, and dyspepsia has been reported, which is basically like a kind of upset tummy. Numerous reports record intestinal upsets after people have eaten foods containing insects and mites. In 3 experiments conducted on healthy subjects, ingestion of housefly larvae produced nausea in 83% of volunteers. Maggots? Live maggots? I think they're burying the lead here. How about the whopping 17% of people that didn't get nauseated? Why do people who eat more plants get less cancer? We've talked about some phytonutrients that can act as antioxidants to douse free radicals, how some can boost our liver's own detoxifying enzymes, and some that even boost our DNA repair enzymes to patch up any damage done. But 22 years ago, the interceptor molecule hypothesis was postulated. Serving as a first line of defense, interceptors bind to mutagens and carcinogens, and thereby block them from coming in contact with our DNA in the first place. See, many carcinogens, shown here in blue, have a flat ring system narrow enough to slip into the spine of our DNA, causing mutations. But if some interceptor were able to glom onto the carcinogen first, it may no longer fit into our DNA, so the search was on, combing for the existence of carcinogen-binding molecules, and in 2007 we discovered one such amazing molecule was chlorophyll, the most ubiquitous plant pigment in the world, that which makes dark green leafy vegetables dark green. In subsequent years, the ability of chlorophyll to totally abolish DNA damage of human cells exposed to carcinogens was documented in a petri dish. But what we really need to see is does it work in people? But you can't just give people carcinogens unless you pay them enough. Effects of chlorophyll on low-dose aflatoxin in human volunteers. They had people drink a solution of radioactive aflatoxin, the carcinogen that used to be a problem in peanut butter, with or without spinach chlorophyll. Here's the big spike in their bloodstream of aflatoxin without spinach in their stomach, and this is with. Apparently, the chlorophyll bound to the aflatoxin and prevented its absorption into the bloodstream. In sum, these studies provide substantial evidence that chlorophylls can strongly inhibit uptake of aflatoxins in the whole animal, which in this case was us. Don't forget to subscribe to the free daily videos at nutritionfacts.org.